surveillance with a Honduran drug gang.
We're hearing from immigration lawyers, sources of ours, that there was a wave of Honduran refugee claimants coming through the system. And the question was why? And when we cross-checked that with police records, we saw that a number of them were young kids, 11 to 14 years old, that were being arrested as well for the trafficking of crack cocaine. And so that's where we began our investigation. We wanted to know where these guys were coming from and how in the world were they landing in Vancouver and selling on the street. These guys were coming from only a small little community of 3 to 4 villages in the middle of nowhere, Honduras. And so we knew that something was going on in terms of, who was behind it, that sort of thing. So we began our investigation. We started looking at trying to find a source. We found an El Salvadoran who was on the brink of being kicked out as a refugee claimant, who actually worked with one of the lawyers, a Canadian lawyer, that was counseling these guys on how to claim refugee status in order to stay in Canada to deal drugs.
Can you describe what that was like?
It was hours, weeks of sitting in vans with tinted windows, sitting on rooftops, covered up, overlooking these stash houses where, these drug deals were going on, where people would show up, and yell up at a window, and the drugs would be thrown out, and then someone else would, get the money from these guys, different runners. And then it was lots of time also watching the police, circling these guys and showing how ineffective the police force actually was in cracking down on these guys.
Sorry, did you say the police were ineffective?
Correct, because these guys pretty much knew the pattern of patrols of police. And the interesting part about this gang was that we found out that not only was this gang operating in Vancouver, but it was a circuit that they were running. Once the heat got too hot on them in Vancouver, they would be kicked out of the country, their refugee claim wouldn't go through, and then they would simply end up in a city like Seattle in the US or in Portland, and they would literally run this gamut, and 6 to 8 months later they would come back again. So we literally pinpointed a few of these characters, and we waited, and 6 to 8 months later, sure enough, these same characters were showing up in the courts being arrested for being drug mules or for peddling drugs.
Well, that's a really long process. I mean, the fact that you actually had to wait 6 to 8 months after they had left the country to come back and then redo this whole thing again.
Yeah, it was very much a sort of series of stories. So we first released the fact that these Honduran crack cocaine gangs were operating, and then we followed them up. And it's the revisiting of these stories that really sort of pushes legislation, if you will, or pushes a public conscience to put pressure on the government to do something about it.